Good morning and welcome to Mental Health Matters with me, Dr. Audrey Tang. My co-host is Judith Crosier, and this is the show where we take a deep dive into all things mental health and well-being. Today's topic is an incredibly serious one, and it's one that is not often discussed. This is when a child is abusing their parent. And we're very lucky today because we have Chloe Martin from the Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse Service to talk to us about this. And it's a scary topic. And we are grateful to you, the viewers, who have sent in your lived experiences, which is what has prompted this show. This show was inspired by two of these, which I'm going to read to you. Read one of them to you now, and then we'll save the other one for a little bit later. But this is the first experience. My niece, who is 11 years old, rules the household. I can't even call my sister because she has her phone. We always, even as a family, need to do what she wants to do because she will shout and scream and make things difficult so my sister can't come if we do anything else. And even when we do things her way, she'll still suddenly kick off on the day. My sister always placates her because she's too tired to argue. And my brother-in-law, who is a therapist, says, oh, she'll grow out of it, and lets her have her way anyway. But I can see my niece as being more manipulative than that. She's been to therapy, but it doesn't seem to help. I don't know what she's saying to the therapist, but I struggle when I see how exhausted my sister is, and that's when we do see her. She doesn't come round now. So that's the first experience. We'll actually come to the second experience after this because I just need you to digest that for a little bit now. So let's go to the main studio. Well, we are so grateful that we've got you on this show, Chloe. Thank you for being here. It's just one of those topics that really, it blew my mind when I heard the experience in the first place. And then when I found out that you delivered a cause on it, you sort of think, my goodness, this has got to be more common than you think.
Than we'd think, exactly. And it's quite a taboo subject, really, children abusing their parents.
Yeah. I think actually, talking of the taboo, I think abuse in general is one of those topics that has a lot of stigma and a lot of things that kind of prevent people, or is it a barrier for people to actually talk about it. But in regards to it being your own child, your own flesh and blood, I think it comes with just a whole other side of it, really. We're talking about the pressures that parents already have from society. I think even since my child was born, the advice we were given back then is completely different to now. But as a society, as we talk about it, how we discipline children is completely different as well. It's already, gone from children being seen and not heard to now we have a lot of parents that feel like they're not allowed to say no to their children. They're not allowed to tell their children off. But yeah, the taboo of it, I think, is we're always told that we should be the ones parenting. We should have control of our children. And actually, if that's not the case, it's actually really challenging to talk about. I think you get judged a lot as a parent, even if we're not talking about the out of control children that we're potentially talking about here. Even children that might get told off at school, you feel judged by the parents in the school playground. There's loads to it, and I think pressures on parents is half of that problem.
I agree with that. That's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And in terms of how the behaviour starts, is it commonly when children are little, and is it the case that sometimes the behaviour is dismissed as being, oh, she's just being sweet, or, she'll grow out or he'll grow out of it? What's your experience?
It's one of those questions, actually, that I could sit and talk about all day. A lot of this will be. I've got to really be careful not to waffle about it. But we do a session actually in the course that we do deliver for parents experience in this. It's called Who's in Charge? And one of the sessions actually looks at what we term as the causes of the behaviour. And we ask them what they think where this behaviour may have come from. And yes, you will get those families where when they're 3, they say something, might even be swearing, which, you know, you'll see a video, even if it's on social media, and you do think it's hilarious. So it can come from that almost praising and rewarding the bad behaviour, because a 3-year-old doing it is much more cute than a 15-year-old shouting it. Very different. But actually, there are so many different reasons why this behaviour can happen. And it does come under the umbrella of domestic abuse, because what we're talking about here really is child-on-parent violence. And violence is difficult. We like to normally use the word abuse, but the official term is violence. But it actually, when you look at where the behaviours are coming from, the influences on children, which I know we'll probably talk about in a lot more detail later on, it can be anything. It can start when they're 3, and it also can start all of a sudden when they hit puberty. They may have a friend that's not a good influence. So there's no one cause or reason. It's a very unique case, family by family.
I think another thing that's important to distinguish between is, when is it abuse or violence and when is it just pushing those boundaries, you know, acting up a bit, sort of thing.
So when we work with families, we will always talk about those, they're not normal, but those behaviours that most children will display. The classic phases of life are the terrible twos, the tantrums that come with being a 3-year-old, and then fast forward to the teenage years where they're starting to rebel, they're starting to really learn about themselves and push boundaries again. But one of the biggest things in the eligibility for the course that we provide is when those behaviours are deemed as out of control. So it's when, I always describe it that if you didn't tell anybody who you were describing, so you're talking in depth about their behaviour, what they do, they would probably assume it was an intimate partner, which is where the link obviously then is to domestic abuse itself. And then actually when you hear the age of the person, already your attitude might change to how you react to what they're describing. So yeah, it's one of those things that actually the behaviours almost feel like they're taking over the household. That young person is most likely the one that dominates the atmosphere, the mood of the house. It's their way or no way. And actually most people probably in the house will be treading on eggshells around this said person. So yeah, it is when it's just going a bit further than pushing those boundaries, and even those are really complex. And but yeah, it's when it's becoming out of control, and actually it's affecting everybody in the household.
I think that really relates to our first experience that was sent in, and this wasn't by the mother, it was by her brother.
Yes.
So again here, how does that parent then reach out for help if they don't realise, or maybe want to deny that this is happening?
It's really tricky. This question is challenging in the whole industry of what we do, because if the person themselves doesn't know that what they're experiencing is abuse, that is the biggest barrier for them getting support. It is potentially where you would rely on the people around you, that if they are noticing that this behaviour is a problem. So in that case specifically, it would be that the person that's recognising it as being an issue is having gentle conversations with that parent, because one of the biggest things around this is if you're someone watching it, one of the worst things you can do is go on headstrong, you know, telling them this is exactly what's happening, being too negative, being too hard, because actually for a lot of people experiencing abuse, it can make them kind of push away. The person themselves, if they really don't recognise that it's abuse, they probably do.
Yes, I know what you mean.
They probably do. There will be something within them that's saying this is not right, it doesn't feel okay. And it's actually just about empowering that person to know that they need a support network. The biggest thing is having people around you that can then help you through that kind of process of then getting help.
And sort of just to round off this, you've got the person who now maybe does realise it's happening, they have it in the back of their mind, but now they're too embarrassed to say something because they've judged themselves more than anyone else is ever going to judge them. How do you help them not blame themselves?
Again, I think it's doing things like this, for one, where they've not necessarily reached out for help themselves, because that's the biggest step. It's almost having to hear it to say it's okay, to know that actually this problem on its own, so child and parent violence, is an increasingly massive problem. It is getting worse and worse by the minute, really, with a lot of the families we're working with. And I think for people to actually just know that they're not the only ones experiencing it, and actually reaching out for help will eventually cause some kind of change within their household. But it's just getting the education out there, the knowledge out there to know that it's not okay, and there are things out there that can help.
Make it less taboo.
Yeah, exactly that.
Having
Talking
that
about it.
Yes.
Yeah, and if they're not quite ready to go to even a helpline or anything like that, you know, it might just be touching in with the school. So someone a bit more direct, they've not had to, you know, reach onto a phone call that can be quite intimidating. It may be someone that they see every day and just go, this is happening, is this okay? Get someone else to tell you it's not okay, get someone else to help you. And realistically, if it is a member of a school, a team at school, or a different kind of professional, they then should really take upon that almost support base and give you that network, if you like, to then get the help that you need.
Oh my goodness. Chloe, you're staying with us because there's so much to talk about here. We will be back right after this.
Hi there, I'm Dawn Livingston, your host on the Transcend and Succeed show. Join me Fridays at 2 p.m. Central for limitless inspiration and ways to help you transcend your limitations. Tune into the Achieve TV network and the Voyage to Vitality channel. Transcend and Succeed show, right here on A360 TV.
Well, welcome back to the show. We've got Chloe Martin with us from the Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse Service, and we are talking about what is a taboo subject, and that is child on parent abuse. And to unpack this even further, there is another lived experience. I said this show was prompted by two. Now, this second one was my daughter was arrested by the police at 15. I had to call the police on her because she was wrecking my house and throwing things at me. They released her because I didn't press charges, but her behaviour hasn't changed unless I do what she wants me to do. I have spent so much on therapy, and this is for her. She spent a week at a retreat centre, and that whole week she was absolutely fine, and the staff spoke very well of her, but then she came home and nothing changed then either. But at other times, she's sweet and kind, and we do things together and we eat together, and those days are wonderful. And it's so complex. Just reading that right there, that's so complex. In both those experiences, you've got the parent who's too exhausted for conflict in the first place. It seems to be there's an element of manipulation, but in both cases there's an element of love, and that bit's wonderful. And so, how do you unpack that? How do you start?
Knowing where to start is probably the hardest bit, but within the whole of that, that is completely the thing in the middle of that is manipulation and control, because even again talking about domestic abuse as a general topic, it's all about the power imbalance within a relationship. And within that, you've got it there that she actually maintained control. There was no outburst, there was no negative behaviour on this retreat.
Yes.
Whereas actually at home, there seems to be no control. And that is often used as an excuse through any perpetrator, so the one inflicting the abuse. It is often because they'll say they're out of control of what they're doing. They don't know why they do it. Yet put them in a situation like that, and you can clearly see the difference of behaviours. So one of the hardest things, I think, for the parents that do come to us around this problem is actually being allowed to talk about their children negatively. Yes. So actually having a safe space to say, at this point in time, I don't like my child or their behaviour. I don't feel safe around them, I resent it a little bit, and actually say my child is manipulative. It's a horrible word. It is really horrible, and I think it's much easier to label a full-grown adult as manipulative than it is a child.
Yes.
But actually, every single child is manipulative.
It's what you develop first, isn't it, actually?
They do. They know. They learn very quickly how to get what they want. So unless that's dealt with when they're younger, or, you know, when it starts to almost come a thing again when they are getting older, and learning about society, learning what they can and can't have, it becomes a problem again. And if it's not managed, or they learn to be a little bit, it's sort of like you have to keep above children all the time, which is actually near on impossible at the moment. But that level of manipulation for parents to talk about is really challenging.
And I think this sort of leads us on to talking about the influences on children at the moment, because this is where we want to take the blame away from the parent in many ways, because you might have the most refined household, or rules, everything, values, the whole lot, but you've got the internet, you've got that child's friends, you've got things that they just see on the street, and what are those many influences that we have, and how do we minimise the impact?
One of the activities we actually do on the course that we provide is about the influences on children, and it actually lists the sort of main ones that we have. It can be family members, friends, school, anything else. So like even if it's a book they've read, TV, social media, which again we could talk about all day, phones, anything, hobbies that they do. And they scale it almost on what they think, between a number of like -10 to +10. They're right in the middle as a parent, but then they scale how much more or less influence they feel like that child has compared to their own. It sounds more complex. When you actually get to the nitty-gritty of it, by the end of it, the percentage almost of the impact that the influence the parent has is tiny. It's a really small number, yet they've got 20 million other things that are also influencing them. So we do kind of strengthen that and say, although it's a very small number, you are the most important influence. However, look at everything else that your child is going through right now, who they talk to, what they're doing, what is changing their thought process, which then helps them realise that their behaviour is not solely down to them.
But the change could
but the change is most likely to come from them, because that's the most important influence. So it's the most powerful thing we do. It's quite soon, you know, when they start the course that we do it, because it gives them the empowerment to go, oh, okay, it's not my fault. Maybe there's something we can now do to change. Because one of the main reasons why, it was Eddie Gallagher that has created the Who's in Charge programme. And one of the things that is identified by doing it to the parent and not with the child is we're talking about very uncooperative children, and actually probably giving them a course on it might even give them that little bit more power, because we're almost telling them what not to do, and they're going to go home and just do it.
Yes, of course, yes.
So although we're taking the responsibility off the parent, no matter what the reasons are for why we're here, one of the biggest ones for our service is it could be learnt behaviour, because there has been previous domestic abuse in the household. We're taking away the blame. It doesn't matter, actually, from this day forward. Forget about why they're doing it. How can we stop or change it? And really kind of empowering them to know that actually we need to stop that cycle of blame and actually move forward from it.
That's really interesting. And really interesting as well when you think about the small amount of input that parents do have, because you know,
so
it's
much.
natural to think that they would have a huge amount of input, but there's so much else going on. So how would you, in your Who's in Charge course, how would you help parents to regain confidence in their parenting?
I think the main thread actually of this course, and I will say it's probably within anything I've done to do with children and young people in my career, this is probably the best programme that I have been able to facilitate, because it just stops that enforcing that stereotype or stigma around the fact that everything is the parent's fault, everything is down to the parent. This one actually throughout, from the very beginnings to the end, is all about empowering, and they have to change their attitude for the whole household to kind of change.
Yes.
Because although we want the child's behaviour to change, we can't force that, we can't make them do that. But if we change what we're doing, essentially the domino effect then will come in regards to how we respond, how we deal with it, will then impact how that child behaves. And one of the biggest sessions as well in regards to that side is we talk about being assertive. So I know I always do that, as well as being assertive against other adults as well. So a lot of the families that we support will have probably had every professional you can imagine involved at some point.
Yeah, it's like the example.
Yeah, including the police, including social care. And throughout that process, at least one of those professionals, whether it's on purpose or not, most likely not, have made that parent feel like they're failing. And it could have just been the tiniest of comments that parent has taken that way because they're on the defence of trying to protect their little bubble. But they feel like failures, they feel like they're not doing a good job. And unless they change that attitude and feel like they're in control, they're not going to have the control in the household. Whilst I just mentioned that, we also talk about the stigma that comes with the words like power, influence and control. And actually, it's okay for a parent to be in control. It's okay for them to have power. Essentially, we're supposed to, as parents, have that over our children. We will sometimes coerce our children. We do that, and part of that is actually part of their development as well, because we're guiding them.
Yes.
It's when that power, that coercion is abused, it's taken out of context when it's negative. So it's taking control back and actually being the parent.
In a positive way.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Wow, really interesting. So thinking about consequences, listening about the girl whose own parent called the police on her, which must have been really hard to do, but even that wasn't a consequence enough for the child to change her behaviour when she eventually came back home. So how do you approach that, and how do children see the consequences of their behaviour?
So the course is 9 weeks, and across that 9 weeks, I would safely say the main strategy, and maybe the only strategy, is learning how to put consequences in effectively. And, we have like a flow chart of what the 3 types of consequences are. So you've obviously got the natural, I can't remember what they are now, I've had a brain freeze, but there's 3 different types. The main aim is to get the natural one, because it's the natural consequence of what they're doing. But a lot of the time, they don't happen. A classic example is if it's raining, and you say, put your coat on, and they're like, no. So, okay, off you go then. They get wet. They come in all sad. And you go, well, And that takes the responsibility away from the parent then. 'Cause it's like, I didn't control the rain. I told you, you still got wet. But what you will find is the best of parents will put in the most ridiculous consequences. So even myself, with my 5-year-old, I might say, well, you're not going to get a birthday present now because we're naughty. I am going to get her a birthday present. I might say now, Father Christmas isn't going to come. Father Christmas is definitely going to turn up on Christmas Day. Yeah. But for one, Christmas isn't until December. We've got months until Christmas right now. So it's looking at how to put them in that makes it work for your family, and actually don't set your children up to fail. Don't set yourself up to fail. But I'm glad the police situation has been mentioned, because actually a lot of the families we're working with, the behaviour, I'm not 100% sure what led to that police call, but we're talking about children that are pulling out weapons on their parents. They're doing really, really dangerous things, or they're hurting themselves, or at least threatening to hurt themselves. And actually, it is something that you should call the police about. In that circumstance there, that parent has done amazing, because to call the police on your own child is just,
so
you just don't even want to have to comprehend doing that. I think it's hard enough doing it on anyone you know, let alone your own flesh and blood. But in that instance, what potentially may happen is, yes, you've called the police, which is great, but if you don't follow through and press charges, potentially that child gets more power because they go, the police won't even touch me. Yeah. Or they'll lose respect for the parents. It's like, well, you called the police, but what did they do about it? Nothing. Yeah. So it is the hardest bit, and most of the families we are working with, when they talk about what their children have done, you'd be like, that is something you'd call the police about. The police are working at dealing with it a bit better. It is something you'll come across if you get more people calling you about it, is sometimes the police don't do as much as you might like them to in these situations. But again, alongside domestic abuse, people working with it are having more training, there's more understanding. So slowly but surely we're getting there. Yeah. But it's challenging for the parent in that moment.
Oh, gosh, yeah, that really is.
Thank you. And in terms of then ongoing support, because obviously if the parents might go on your course and come out the other side and do lots of things differently, but it doesn't mean that the anger, for example, of the child might go away. So do you provide ongoing support, counselling, anger management, that type of thing?
Not necessarily. It's very unique, per case by case, and I think most people that do work with these families, we can't do a whole, service for every single person in the exact same way. But interestingly, with anger management, it's quite a tricky one, that actually people who work in this industry might not be their first port of call, because we do a whole session, again, on anger and the myths that surround anger. And actually, if we don't do things beforehand with this child, if we just go, right, anger management, we're almost kind of pushing into that anger's the problem.
Yes.
We're saying it's because you're angry that you're doing this. So we already do that ourselves. If we're angry ourselves, we'll say, well, it's because I was angry. It's one of those emotions that we blame everything on. We almost separate the two.
Yes, and when I was teaching, I used to be a teacher, there were children who said that.
Yes.
Well, it's because I've got anger issues. And because they've been told they've got anger issues, they use that
they stick to that.
They blamed everything on that.
Yeah, and it's really easy to do it, because if you've ever experienced anger, which most of us have, everything in you is going, this is because I'm angry, it's not really me, everything. And you feel out of control. Yeah. It's one of those that is easy to do that. But if we feed that, then all it's going to come down to is it's because I got angry that I did it. It's not actually because I made that choice.
Yes, it takes away that person's...
It does. So for our service in particular, for our children's support, if there has been a history of domestic abuse, we could then obviously support that child further if the problem wasn't going away. But we would signpost to local mental health services that may be looking at more the cause of the anger, not the anger itself, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And actually, again, with Who's in Charge, we only provide it for those that have the child is 8 years and older. Because alongside that, developmentally, if they're appropriately developing, they're hitting all the milestones at the correct age, it's from 8 years old that we actually learn to take responsibility for our own behaviour, our own actions. So if it's 8 and under, it'll probably be a different service. We'd be looking at a different avenue. But actually, that's why it's good that we can start putting their behaviour back onto them and say, okay, I get what you're saying, but you still chose to do that. It's about good and bad choices, really, and really supporting them to make the right one.
Oh my gosh, this is so complex. There's so many different things that go into this.
Yeah.
We're keeping Chloe, and we'll be back after this.
A world without the arts is one without confidence, creativity and community, and yet funding has been reduced every year. Arts programmes have been shown to benefit social inclusion and well-being, particularly for marginalised groups, with projects fostering a sense of belonging, cultivating mutual understanding, and breaking down social barriers and isolation. Participation in arts programmes can help boost confidence and open doors to opportunities that may otherwise be inaccessible. Click Arts Foundation offers grants up to £2,000 for grassroots arts projects twice a year, with our community arts experience trustees meticulously scoring each project on impact and sustainability. To date, we have supported craft and visual arts projects, dance, drumming for well-being, and preservation of heritage and culture. If you share our passion, not just for maintaining the arts themselves, but contributing to the many benefits it can bring, please consider making a donation to Click Arts Foundation registered charity.
Welcome back to the show. We are talking about domestic abuse, but in particular, we're talking about children abusing their parents. And we have Chloe Martin with us from the Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse Service, where they deliver a course called Who's in Charge? And it's such a complex situation. So we're pulling at all of those threads, but also some of those solutions, they make a lot of sense. And your explanation of why the course chooses to go down certain avenues, that is really telling about how we need to think about this topic.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to throw one more bit of complexity in here because I wanted to just take a moment to look at the abuse of a child on a senior parent. So very much over 8 years old. And the example here, this isn't a child, this is a carer, but it actually then goes into something a bit more telling. So this situation is, my aunt needed support for dementia, so we arranged a carer. They got on really well. He became a huge source of support, but this was before the pandemic. During the pandemic, we were not able to visit her, and the carer and his wife became their only bubble. When restrictions lifted, we were in touch over the year, but we were not physically present until that point. So during this time, the carer was doing the shopping. He had use of her credit cards. We noticed he was filling up with petrol and doing a bit of his own shopping, but we thought, well, the car, maybe she needs to go somewhere and so on. It was only when the bank manager called me to say that the carer had been in with her and he was trying to transfer over $150,000 to his account that they refused to do it and called us. We realised he'd been siphoning money. She won't listen to us, not because of the dementia, but because he was the only person there during the pandemic, and we can't fault that care. I reported it to the police. And what the police said was not just, yes, they'll take it seriously, but I was the second person in that day, and the police had just had a father in reporting the son was doing exactly the same thing. So whilst this started off as a story that we could have potentially put in a show on fraud and scamming, I wanted to put it in here because this is clearly happening. There is another type of abuse. And if a parent is ageing or has dementia, I mean, how can we address this as maybe a friend of that parent?
Yeah, it's similar to what we were saying before in the other scenario where family members are noticing that potentially there's an abusive situation going on and the victim may not be aware or may be in denial. It's an added complexity if there is an additional thing there with the diagnosis, if they have got dementia or anything like that. That on itself is a completely different topic. However, if it's the support we're trying to give the person seeing it of the loved one, you know, it's the same thing. It's getting as much advice as you can. Obviously, we would recommend in the Northamptonshire area to call Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse Service, mainly to get the advice. We can signpost as well, even if it's just to offload. Our advice line is there for that. But it's knowing as much as you physically can about that problem. And again, if I would say, you know, I don't know what the outcome was there with the police, but hearing the fact that they'd mentioned what else had happened that day in regards to this, it just shows you how big this problem is. But this is all under the abuse umbrella, and it's talking about it, it's going to the right person about it, it's having people around you, because actually abuse doesn't just affect the perpetrator, and it affects everyone around them. And it's really important that we do get that support in the right way and probably get advice from someone who's in the industry so we know how to help that person safely.
Yes, and sort of relating to this one, it comes back to this point of guilt, because in this experience that person was saying, but he was there during the pandemic, he was there, I was not there. And you hear this as well. Just recently I had somebody say that they could see their daughter going through an abuse situation, but they couldn't say anything because the daughter would have just turned around and said, yeah, but what about you? And I'm seeing the same thing in the family. How do you work with people who have, it is this overwhelming guilt of going, yeah, but I know it's my fault, I know I was part of this?
It's the hardest bit, I would say, because, you know, even by the point they're with us, they've asked for help. There's clearly that. aspect there where they've kind of got past it a little bit because they've managed to put that to the side and say, actually, something's wrong. But it's, as a professional, from a professional stance, it's having the ability to keep on reassuring, keep having the same conversations, keep saying, is that you know, that classic thing, there is no excuse for abuse, none whatsoever.
Yes.
So no matter what that person did beforehand, it is a classic trait of abusive people to be an incredible human being to start off with. They come across like the best thing that's ever happened there, that you wouldn't fault them. And then these things start to happen, and that is part of the reason why the person in it, the person experiencing it, can't see or doesn't want to leave or does feel guilty or has all those feelings that keep them there.
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest things. Why do they stay? Why don't they leave? Why don't they ask for help? It is because in that situation you've asked the question of, but they feel guilty because that carer was there. Yeah. They may have been, but look at what they're doing.
Yeah. Yes, you've still
it takes
got to
away.
see that.
You have to retrain your brain to say, fine, they were nice, but what were they doing
in the meantime?
In the meantime, you know, they may have done the personal hygiene or however that person needed looking after, but they've also been abusing that person.
Yes.
And it's really, really difficult if you are talking to the victim survivor themselves. That's the part that's the longest bit to try and actually stop that thought process. It's very, very challenging. Even harder for a loved one.
Yes.
Friend, family. I think it can lead to them saying, I can't do this anymore, I don't want help because you're not listening to me, you know.
Yeah.
And it takes a really strong person to be able to keep being there for their friend or their family member to actually say, I'm here. I know what's happening, but I am here for you. I'm going to do what you need. And also to remember that we should never really be encouraging that person just up and leave.
Yeah.
If we're talking about an abusive situation, maybe not so with the scenario you mentioned, because that's a professional slash, you know, relationship. But I have to highlight it. We would never recommend you say, just get out.
Yeah.
You know, everything, research shows it, the most dangerous time for any abusive relationship is
at the point of leaving.
Yeah. And in regards to child and parent violence, although we are saying pushback now, we're trying to, you know, change their behaviour, you will see pushbacks from that child. When they start to see you're taking control back, we have to prepare that parent that their behaviour is going to escalate because they're realising, they're going, whoa. But we have to support them to get through that with the child before they get to adults. And then it becomes really out of hand.
Yeah. Much more difficult.
Much more difficult.
So from that then, how would you give people who have been abused by their children, how would you give them the confidence to sort of take back control and to stop their internal voice telling them that it's their fault?
Mm-hmm. Again, I think you have to be at the right time to put the changes in. You have to be ready for it. So a lot of the time we might be giving these parents the tools to do it and saying, take them away with you. Put them in your little toolbox, your coping toolbox, take them away. And when you're ready, when you feel like you're able to do it, they're there then for you to actually take that next step. We always encourage to pick one small thing to start off with. Change something small, see how you get on, and then add something else to it. One of the biggest messages throughout the whole thing is this whole kind of discussion on the entitlement versus responsibility. We spoke about it last time I did come to speak to you, and I actually use this in my personal life as well. So whenever I'm talking to anyone about something to do with this, it's looking at what abuse actually is. And that person often has a very high sense of entitlement. Their entitlement is up here, where their responsibilities are down here. And when you sort of relate that to children, the children that are acting up are entitled. Don't tell me what to do. I lay the I do the rules, you don't. I have control. I want this. I'm going to get it. They probably don't have any responsibility. So they probably don't have chores at home. They probably. If they get asked to go somewhere, we take them, we do it all for them. So even, it sounds really silly, but even just putting in things that they have to do at home.
It's just almost, something, isn't it, to start?
Make their bed in the morning. Start off with something. make them responsible, because as soon as the balance changes and we go back up here, you've gone from an abusive relationship to a respectful one.
Yeah.
And it's that word respect that is missing in these sort of relationships that we're talking about.
That makes so much sense.
It really does.
It's
really
almost like
does.
we know it deep
Yeah.
down, but I think with society, our children get everything now.
And if they don't, they tell you about it because they see it.
Yeah, it's the influences, like we were going back to. It's the fact that their trainers now cost £300-400. Their PlayStations are extortionate. Their mobile phones. Who pays for that? The parent. And actually, you go on to another completely different topic, that if they don't get it, they will get picked on at school, or you believe in yourself that if they don't have it, they're going to get bullied.
Yeah.
And how cruel the world is at the moment, they probably will.
Yes, yes.
So it's like a whole thing of a parent trying to protect, but we're giving them too much without them having to work for it.
Gosh.
It's sort of quite simple when you break it down, isn't it? The solution.
Yeah, it's getting there though. If this has happened, that tiny little simple thing is huge.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. I think in your head you go, I can do this. But it's making sure you don't go all, run it, hit the floor running. It's little bit by little bit what you can manage at the right time. Absolutely, yeah.
That's really good advice.
Yes.
And in terms of giving advice, if friends and family see this going on and potentially the person experiencing the abuse isn't doing anything about it, what would you advise friends and family to do or say?
Keep supporting, because that person experiencing it is already going to feel really isolated.
Yes.
And one of the biggest things from doing the group work that we do is the most beneficial part of it isn't actually what I tell them, it's they network with other parents going through the same thing.
Okay.
So, if someone here is listening to this, for example, or have seen it online or whatever, and they want to gently suggest it, you can do, but be prepared for them to kind of push it straight back onto you, maybe get a bit defensive, but just be their support. It's extremely challenging. It's extremely, for that person experiencing it, it's awful, but it's just that one time that you're there, they may then suddenly go, I need help. And that is the key bit to any abusive relationship. You just need the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And where can we find out more about you, about the course that you run?
So Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse Service, we obviously have a website, and it is literally just NDAS, so ndas.co. And then for Who's in Charge, obviously if you're outside of the Northamptonshire area, it literally again is who'sincharge.co.uk, and there is something on there that shows you wherever you are in the country. It shows you your local services that do provide the Who's in Charge course. So it's not just something we do in Northampton, it is something that you can access. But ask the questions. There's email addresses of the people that kind of facilitate the training of it. And they're brilliant actually at responding. So even if it's just for a bit of advice, they will be there to obviously answer the questions.
Oh gosh,
Fantastic.
That's brilliant. We'll keep that in the show notes. We are keeping Chloe with us because she's going to give us her top tips at the end of the show. We'll go over to Business Boost. In Business Boost today, I wanted to give a reminder of something we've said on previous shows. It is important that a workplace is aware that domestic abuse could be going on, because often the workplace can be the one area that is a safe space for that person, whatever the abuse type may be. And if you need any extra support in the workplace, there are 4 main areas of health and safety law relevant to this. And this is the Health and Safety at Work Act, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations, Reporting of Injuries, and Health and Safety Consultation with Employees Regulations. This is supported in law. But there are things that you can do. Recognise something's going on. If you see sudden changes in behaviour, do not be afraid to ask the question. But when you do ask the question, respond with immediate, I believe you. I believe you. Reassure them that the organisation understands that domestic abuse is something that the organisation cares about and it might affect their performance and so on. Don't ask them to start proving it or anything like that. Do handle that disclosure with real care, compassion, and that understanding they do not need to prove anything. Providing support, it can be things like diverting phone calls and messages, and even changing extensions if your employee is receiving harassing phone calls at work. Also, agree with the employee if there need to be changes to the work pattern, because that might be something, especially older children in this case, they get to know your work pattern. That can be another area where they can actually find you in order to continue that harassment and so on. It might even be ensuring that employee doesn't have to leave work on their own. There are a number of different things that you can do, and there is a help list which we will put up in the show notes, but it's an area where workplaces do need to take it seriously, because it may be the one area that can be a service that can help, that is a safe space for that person. Well, we've come to the end of the show. My mind has been completely blown, but also opened by this conversation. So thank you, Chloe, for joining us so much.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, gosh, no, we need to talk about this more. I think what I hadn't understood was actually the real ugly complexity of it.
Yeah, me too, exactly. And the scale of it.
Yes.
It's really quite shocking.
It's one of those things where I think we do need to have these conversations.
Yeah.
We do want you to come back, because I think we need to continue these conversations.
Absolutely.
And what we're going to do now is hand it over to you, Chloe, for the last words.
Top tips for the person maybe experiencing any kind of abuse really is, as soon as you start to feel like there's something not quite right, please talk to somebody. It can be a loved one, it can be a friend, but it also can just be the person, if it is to do with your child, a member of staff at the school. But please reach out. I do believe that we'll have a lot of the helplines and everything that are available for you to have a look at, even if it's just picking up the phone. You will find that most of these services have different ways of contacting. It may just be a text message. It may be online chat, so it might not seem so daunting. But as soon as you feel like something's wrong, tell somebody. And actually, if we're talking specifically about child on parent violence, research has actually shown that as soon as the child knows you've spoken to somebody else about it, their behaviour may actually change in a good way. So yeah, top tips, talk. Please speak up, please get help.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we can't wait to speak with you again.
Lovely, thank you.
Have a healthy week.